out this morning and finally cooled off. Now we complain about how cold it is instead of how hot it is. Oh, well, we can't never be satisfied. Had a wedding last night. Went to it, and my niece got married on our Bernice and I's wedding anniversary, October the 7th. And so we all celebrated kind of together, I guess. I was thinking about, on our bulletin, we've been on, Brother Ellis has been using 139 Psalm, and the preacher last night when he was preaching the wedding, he even used that one of them verses in the wedding ceremony. And but we've been studying on Wednesday night about how our bodies, how miraculous God made our bodies and different functions, and how our heart pumps and our eyes, how we see with our eyes and all that stuff. And I got thinking about even little things. God uses in the Bible an illustration about ants and how they work and things like that. I remember when I was a kid, I used to sit and crumble up crackers or breadcrumbs and watch the ants. I mean, you might not have ever done that. See how they could, if one of them can't, if you got a crumb and it's too big, see, they'll go get help, and there'll be 3 or 4 who try to drag it off. And I was thinking about those monarch butterflies. Take a caterpillar, I guess you call it, and he forms a cocoon, like I give Kathy, and she killed it. But it'll weave a little cocoon, and the worm's probably way big, and when it winds up, it's just a little bitty thing. But if you look at that cocoon, that thing is perfect, and it is really pretty. I don't know if y'all have probably seen them. I don't know, but in the top part of it, it's usually green, and the top part of it is gold. It's got little gold indentures, and how that worm fixes that, or God engineers it, and but that thing is just perfect. And then a butterfly comes out of it. I don't know what happens to the butterfly. He just flies away. But I don't know what he turns into. He might turn back into the worm. I don't know if he does or not. And hadn't been too long ago, Brother Ellis had a thing in one of our bulletins about spider. Most people don't like spiders, tells them that in the Bible that they're in king's palaces. Spiders are in king's palaces. But there was an article that he had in there about a soldier, and he was praying. He was in this, I don't know, somewhere desert island, and the enemy was about to get him, and he prayed to God to hide him and or protect him so he wouldn't be captured. And he found a cave, and he went in that cave, and he was praying that God would help him. And so God sent the spider, and he weaved a web across in front of the where he was entrance of the cave. And when the soldiers come up there, well, they started in there, and all that webbing and stuff so they didn't go in there. So God, he didn't realize that God was protecting him at the time, but from that. And, you know, if you ever go out, especially when it's a little dew or something on a dam, a spider weaves a web, and that web is just perfect. It just starts out like a bullseye, like a gun or a target, and each little section gets a little bit bigger, and it lines up. I mean, that web is just perfect, and but God engineers that. But in Psalms 139 verse or chapter, verse 14 says, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that thou soul knoweth right well." And you skip down to verse 17, says, "How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them." Then on over to verse 23 and 24 of that chapter says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." We don't realize the blessings we have, and the little things that the Lord does for us, and we need to think about them and use them in our lives, and we need to thank God every day, for them. And sometimes we just don't realize all the little details and the little bitty things, and most people think, big marvelous thing, so, but God uses the little details, and we need to thank Him for them. We just mentioned our class, and excuse me, and need to think about the ones that's on the prayer list, and be with our pastors who leads us here, and they're going on a trip, so pray that they'll have a good, joyful time on their trip. And I don't know, don't forget our revival coming up. Start praying for it. And we did get a lot of cleaning done. I guess the ladies got a lot of cleaning done. We did try to clean a little bit outside. We got got a few things done yesterday, so praise the Lord for that. So if you want to stand, we'd be dismissed at our classes. And our Father in heaven, we come to you, Lord, just thanking you for this day and for the many blessings that you give us, and we just seem to overlook.
last time he was gone, I wrote down where we stopped. Yeah, I'll take it. Sure. I usually write down where I quit, and somehow or another, it's been, I don't know, a month or two ago, and I forgot where I quit. So some of this may be repeat. If it is, you probably need it again. You know, what is it? How many times do you have to tell a child something before they get it? In the case of Noah, what, 5,000, something like that, up 10,000. My wife says I'm that way. You know, she calls it selective hearing. So I always write down where I quit, but evidently I threw that note away or lost it or something. So we'll pick back up where I think we left off, and we'll go from there. We looked at Luke 14 at the parables. Jesus gave two parables there, and one of them was the parable of building a tower. And, you know, I don't, somebody remembers where we left off. Don't, you know, tell me so I don't have to go through everything again. But it was not just a small room. This was a big tower where they could serve as a lookout, but it was also fortified so that they could also, in case of an attack, they could flee to the tower, and they could be safe, at least in many, many cases. And so the guy starts to build the tower, but he didn't plan ahead. He didn't think ahead, and so he gets the part of the tower built, lays the foundation, starts to build the tower, and he runs out of money, and he runs out of materials. And Jesus gave us the lesson there of counting the cost. Before you do something, except when you build the print shop, y'all weren't here for that, were you? Yeah. Before you start something, you need to have some kind of an idea of what's involved. You know, in the case of, I don't know if you all drive around Florence very much, but occasionally, yesterday I had to be back over in the part of town where we used to live, and now they are building subdivisions everywhere. Everywhere we turn. We used to get to our house, we would go past big fields, you know, wide open spaces. Now there's apartments going up everywhere that we looked. And it was kind of discouraging in a way. But can you imagine a guy who is a multi-billionaire? And I read last week, who is it, Bezos or Bozos or whatever his name is. He's worth something like 135 billion with the B. Can you imagine somebody like us who doesn't have that much money? You know, Charles, you've done some building in your time. Can you imagine taking your big dozer and your backhoe and you get out there and you find out, oops, I don't have gas to run the bulldozer. You should have thought ahead. You know, how much gas does that thing take, that big one you used back here? It takes a lot. 100 gallons? How much does your husband's truck take? 500 gallons? 500 or more? Yeah. How would you like to fill that one up? No, I wouldn't. But you know, Charles gets out there and he thinks, oh my, I'm supposed to dig out for this house and I don't have enough gas. What would you think about Charles as a contractor? Not very much. Jesus said when you're going to build a house, especially in the case of a tower, a lot of people are depending on you. A lot of people depend on that tower. You need to make sure you know what you're getting into. what's it going to cost to remove the rubbish? What's it going to cost when they built this building? And most of you were not here, but when they built this building, the land, believe it or not, was level with the top of the hill over here. And Mr. Watkins, the contractors came out and they started digging the foundation, and they hit some kind of a wet spot, where the foundation was supposed to be. So they kept digging, still wet, kept digging, and now we're 4 or 5 feet below the top of that wall or that hill. We started out level, and the building would have been level, but there was a soft spot here, and so he had to dig and keep digging till he got down below that wet spot. That was something none of us expected. But is the soil good? What's the material going to cost? Joey's not here. Joey has done a lot of work for us over the years. And I say, okay, tell me how much it's going to cost so I know, make sure that we've got enough money. He can get it down almost to the penny, exactly what it's going to cost, what the material's going to cost, everything. Can you imagine a builder starting to build, getting the foundation, and realizing, I don't have enough money to finish? Jesus said in the verses we read last time that in that case it would be to his shame. People would mock him. He began to build and was not able to finish because he failed to count the cost. He made grand announcements. We're going to build a tower. He invested a lot of money. But because he didn't count the cost, the structure was half finished and people mocked him for it. The application that Jesus gave, and like I said, I don't remember if we covered some of this, but in the Christian life, I've been pastoring for, I was ordained in 73. That would make it 50 years this year. And over the years, you preach, people get all excited. Woohoo! And they're just all excited over the message. Their emotions are high, and they want to serve God, and, they want to dedicate themselves to God. They make a grand announcement. I'm rededicating my life, or in some cases, God saved me. And then they begin to realize being a Christian is not all emotion. Do you remember what I told you right after God saved you? Yeah. Right after God saved him, I met with him and said, you now have a target on your back. Satan is coming after you. Satan is going to attack you. How far off was I? Not much. A lot of people join the church. A lot of people make a profession. I remember when we were in Texas, a young couple came forward one Sunday, and as I began to talk to them, I think it was his mother or her mother had died, and the funeral was like a day or two prior. And so they went to the funeral, and the preacher, I don't know who he was, but, he gave this big, long story about, you're not going to see your mother again unless you repeat after me, pray this prayer. And so they wanted to see their mother, who doesn't. They wanted to go to heaven, so they repeated this prayer he gave them to repeat, came to our church the following Sunday, came down and said, God has saved us, we want to be baptized, and join the church. Since I'd never met them, my wife and I went out to visit them. They were living together, not married. There were some other things going on. And I said, you will have to get married before our church will authorize me to baptize you. And they said, well, if we had known that, we wouldn't have come forward. To my knowledge, they never did get married, at least, and it's like, well, we didn't know we had to get married to join the church. And so they fizzled out. Suddenly they lost their Christianity. People, and that's what Jesus said in verse 26, there is a cost to being a Christian. There is a price that must be met. You must be willing to love God so much that it appears you hate your father, mother, your own wife. If you've ever heard me tell the secret to being married all these years, it's God has to be the center. God has to be number one. And there were times when my wife, when we went to Texas, my wife, in all of our 52 years, or 51 and a half, she has never told me where to go, what to do, or anything else. But when the church in Texas called us, we were laying in bed one night, and I was almost positive God was leading us to Texas. And we were laying there, and she said, if you feel God led, I will go with you. The only thing I ask is you make 100% certain it's God leading. She much rather would have stayed in Ohio. We had a lot of friends there. We had a great church there. God was blessing. Things were going good. And then God moved us 1,600 miles to the extreme opposite, and I no more than got there than we had battle after battle after battle. For 5 years, it was a constant battle. Sometimes you have to put God first even when it isn't pleasant. Are you willing to do that? Count the cost. It means a total surrender. It means giving up my plans, giving up my dreams. It means giving up. I was supposed to be a doctor. Wouldn't you like for me to operate on you? I was supposed to be a doctor. I wanted to be a policeman, but everybody else wanted me to, When God called me to preach, I had to give up being a policeman. Became a police chaplain instead, which was not quite the same. You have to be willing to sacrifice. And so when somebody says, God has called me to preach, you need to count the cost. Brother Harold Harvey, some of you know, was my mentor, and he took me under his wing and said, so God has called you to preach. Yes, sir. Well, let's find out what you're in for. And I spent a year under him, working as his helper at Olmsted Baptist Church down in Olmsted, Kentucky. Spent a year there, and I learned that pastoring is a lot more than preaching three times a week. Count the cost. He showed me, he exposed me. This is what, inside track. This is what a preacher does. This is what a preacher goes through. Count the cost. Are you willing to give up your loved ones? I had a friend of mine one time. He was not pastoring, and I said, hey, there's a church down so-and-so. Would you like for me to mention your name? And he said, no. He said, I will not go out of a certain radius with my mom and dad. My mom and dad live here. I will not go out of this radius. And the church was way out of the radius. I never recommended him again, never really had a lot to do with him, because as a pastor, I have to go wherever God calls me. I'm not going to leave my mom and dad. Well, If you're not willing to hate your mom and dad, your wife, your kids, your family, you need to count the cost, because my parents were in Tennessee. We have been in Indiana. We have been in Ohio. We have been in Texas. We've been in Kentucky twice. Texas was not where I wanted to go. But when you surrender to God, you have to be willing to go where God wants you. Now, he talks about two warring kings. The first part dealt with living and wasting financial resources as well as wasting time. The second part deals with the battle of the Christian life. In this case, in verse 31, what king going to make war against another king? In other words, this first king was going to war. It doesn't say who started it, but he was going to war. And as he began going to war or preparing for war, we need to think this through. I have 10,000 soldiers. They have 20,000 soldiers. Numerically, we are grossly outnumbered. So what does he do before he just charges down to the battlefield and starts fighting? He counts the cost. Notice, he consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000. Now, we understand numbers don't guarantee success. In the Old Testament, there are many, many instances of God using a small number to defeat a large number. Do y'all remember Hezekiah? 2 Kings chapter 19. Hezekiah was the king of Judah, and he was stationed in Jerusalem. And the Assyrian army attacked Jerusalem. They had an army of 185,000 soldiers, plus chariots and a host of other things. Hezekiah only had a very small army. So what does he do? He counts the cost. Lord, if we go out and physically fight them, we are grossly outnumbered. So in counting the cost, he realized, I cannot win this battle. And so he prayed. He sent to Isaiah and said, Isaiah, what do I do? And Isaiah sent back and said, thus saith the Lord. And Hezekiah followed God. And I love that. If you want to look it up sometime, it says that when they woke up the next morning, they were all dead. I love the phraseology of that. I know what it means, but I love the phraseology. 185,000 soldiers were killed by an angel in one night. Because Hezekiah understood, he counted the cost, and he understood, I cannot win. And then having understood, he turned to God and said, God, this battle is yours. You're going to have to fight the battle. And so God did. He didn't act foolishly. He didn't go out and say, okay, God, we're going to win this thing. And God did use the army of David. Recall the great men that we studied, David's great men. One of them killed 300 at one time. And one of them held the sword, and was killing and killing and killing till his hand was wedged to the sword. One person can defeat hundreds of people. But you need to know, first of all, like Hezekiah, God is the one that's going to have to win. And so he counted the cost. In the case of the soldier, he said, okay, can we physically take them on? No. So he consulted. He tried to make peace with them. Can we reach a compromise here? Can we come to an agreement so that we don't have to go to blows and fight and kill each other? I thought of Proverbs. Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, said, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. Sometimes, and I am one of those people, I like to understand whatever it might be. I told you in high school, college especially, I was the why guy. You know, why? Why? I want to understand. I still like to understand what's going on. But sometimes we try to understand it, and there is no understanding. You just have to trust God. Going to Texas was probably the toughest decision that I ever had to make. First of all, I did not want to leave Ohio. I did not want to leave. You understand that. How many different places have you lived in the Marines? How many times were you transferred? Lots, I bet. Transferred many, many times. I did not want to leave Ohio. And I told God years and years ago, there are two places I never want to go to pastor. One was Michigan, and the other one was Texas. Guess where God sent us? So those are two strikes. Number 3 strike, I knew the church in Texas had some problems, and I knew going in I was going to hit the ground running, and I was going to have battle almost from day one, and we did. I did not want to go. I could come up with 50 ways to stay in Ohio, but I could not lean into my own understanding. I didn't understand it. I didn't particularly like it, but I had to trust in the Lord. And in reality, 5 years in Texas made me appreciate Kentucky when God brought us back. And many of the things that we experienced in Kentucky gave me the strength to stand when I came here. Had I not gone to Kentucky, I would have been a totally different person than I am today, because God trained me. I had to trust in the Lord that He was sending me, and I could not lean to my own understanding. So He sought peace. Sometimes Christians fight first and ask questions later. What'd you say to me? How dare you know? And we're ready to fight. In reality, fighting, yes, there are times we have to fight. But in reality, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace internally, but the peace internal will make us long-suffering, gentle, and kind externally. Hebrews 12, follow peace with all men and holiness. As Christians, we don't go around always looking for a fight. Have you ever met somebody that got mad over everything? You know, I like your jacket. It's very nice. What does he mean by that? I meant, I like your jacket. But there are people that will get mad over everything or anything. No, as Christians, this king said, let's see if we can get an understanding here. Instead of getting mad, can I ask what you meant by that? You know, disarm me because you're not yelling. You just disarmed me because now I got to explain what I meant. And if I did mean an insult, I either have to lie about it or come clean. A soft answer turneth away wrath. That's in Proverbs. We as Christians, yes, we will fight if necessary. But that should not be our first goal. Then in verse 33, he closes again. He began with this. He closes with this. If so likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. He didn't just say father, mother, brother, sister, wife, and so forth. He said you have to be willing to forsake everything. I don't know why, but I got up this morning thinking about a good friend of mine. Years ago, he was a member of a church that I held a revival at. And during the revival, he had us over to his home one night for a meal. It's the first time I'd really met him. Didn't know him. Didn't know much of anything about him. He was the general manager of a very large factory. You know what being a general manager is. He was a general manager of a very large factory. Made a killing of a salary. Not like you, but you know, he made a killing of a salary, had just built a brand new house, beautiful, big, nice, beautiful house. That's the house that we went to eat supper that night. Several months later, he surrendered to preach. God called him to a little bitty church, I don't know, maybe a dozen members max. Very little church in Florida. He was way up north, and he went way down south, quit his job, never blinked an eye, never batted an eye. Sold his home, big, beautiful house, moved to Florida, had to work because the church couldn't support him, lived in a little rinky-dink house. And then after I began to know him, we actually became very good friends. God brought him up back to Ohio, but close enough that where I was pastor at that time was close enough that we could fellowship. And I really became very close to him. Had a full-time church, supported him full-time. And then a church up in Michigan called him as pastor. Had about 10 or 15 members. I talked to him on the phone occasionally. He works full-time, pastors full-time. And you know what? He doesn't regret a thing. I said, do you ever miss me in GM? You'll appreciate this. Not in the least. Not in the least. You had a beautiful home. You know what? God called me to pastor. Suddenly, all of that didn't mean a thing. I talked to him on the phone. He's a delivery guy. And so if he's between deliveries for a company, if he's between deliveries, he'll call me and talk to me till he gets to his next delivery. He's as happy as can be. because he's where God put him. He literally forsook a job, forsook a house, forsook the church he had grown up in, forsook his friends, forsook his family, forsook everybody in order to go to a little bitty church down in Florida, then back to Ohio, up to Michigan to another little church. And you know what? He doesn't mind working at all. Doesn't mind working at all. You must be willing to forsake everything if God calls you to. All right, got about 12 minutes. You can get a... we had work day yesterday. There is some egg casserole